April 1945. While the world watched Berlin burn, southeast of the capital, an entire German army was being systematically erased in a meticulously engineered slaughter. The Berlin-Dresden Autobahn became a literal highway of death, a wide concrete strip where German tanks, trucks, and civilian carts made suicidal dashes across open ground, only to be obliterated by Soviet armor positioned on the opposite side. This was the Battle of Halbe, 9 days of hell where over 80,000 men and thousands of civilians were funneled into a perfect kill box. A multi-layered meat grinder of pre-sighted artillery, minefields, and armor from which there was almost no escape. On April 16, 1945, massive artillery barrages erupted along the Seelow Heights. 2 Soviet fronts launched the final assault on Nazi Germany with overwhelming force. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's 1st Belarusian Front attacked from the east. Marshal Ivan Konev's 1st Ukrainian Front swept north from the south. Within days, Zhukov shattered German defenses at Seelow Heights. Konev broke through south of Frankfurt and der Oder. By April 20th, Soviet tanks were already rolling through Berlin's outskirts. But the real trap wasn't Berlin itself. It was what happened southeast of the capital. As Zhukov pushed westward and Konev swung north, their forces moved with devastating speed. The Pincers closed by April 25th, creating a pocket around the town of Halbe that would become one of history's most concentrated killing grounds. Caught inside, the entire German 9th Army, 11th SS Panzer Corps, 5th SS Mountain Corps, 66th Panzer Corps, remnants of the 4th Panzer Army, Waffen-SS units including the elite SS Division Nordland, hastily conscripted Volkssturm militia, and between 10,000 and 30,000 terrified civilians fleeing westward with whatever they could carry. 80,000 men. Thousands of refugees. All trapped in a shrinking pocket with catastrophic logistics. War diaries reveal ammunition rationed to just a few rounds per gun. Fuel shortages immobilized the fearsome Panthers and Tigers. Tanks that could dominate any battlefield now sat abandoned, out of gas. Food supplies had nearly vanished entirely. This wasn't an accident. The Soviets had orchestrated this encirclement with surgical precision, transforming operational art into industrial-scale destruction. At the center of this nightmare stood General Theodor Busse, commander of the 9th Army, staring at maps that showed an impossible situation. From the Führer bunker in Berlin, Hitler's orders were explicit: attack north, relieve the capital, save the Reich. Busse knew the truth. Those orders were fantasy, a delusion from a dying regime. The only rational move was west, toward General Walter Wenck's 12th Army and potential surrender to the Americans rather than the vengeful Soviets. But could he defy the Führer? And even if he did, could 80,000 trapped men break through a Soviet meat grinder specifically designed to annihilate them? In the Führer bunker, Hitler's finger jabbed at maps that bore no resemblance to reality. His orders to General Theodor Busse were explicit. The 9th Army would attack north, relieve Berlin, save the Reich. But southeast of the capital, Busse stared at a different map, one showing 80,000 men trapped in a tightening noose, their fuel tanks nearly empty, ammunition reduced to a few rounds per gun, and thousands of starving civilians clogging every road. This was the ultimate impossible choice: obey the Führer's suicidal fantasy or commit the unthinkable, defiance. Attack north into the full weight of Marshal Georgy Zhukov's 1st Belarusian Front, or break west toward General Walter Wenck's 12th Army and the distant hope of American lines instead of Soviet captivity. Busse's objective shifted to breaking out westward. Between April 24th and May 2nd, 1945, the 9th Army would attempt to escape the trap. 9 days. That's all they had. What emerged from the collapsing pocket wasn't an army. It was a desperate exodus. Wehrmacht regulars from the 11th SS Panzer Corps and 5th SS Mountain Corps, mixed with Waffen-SS units including the SS Division Nordland. Volkssturm militia clutched obsolete rifles. Hastily formed Kampfgruppen were cobbled together from shattered formations. Behind them came the chaos that would doom them. Between 10,000 and 30,000 civilians. German refugees fleeing Silesia and Pomerania. Forced laborers. Concentration camp inmates. All swept into the columns of military vehicles, horse-drawn carts, and families on foot streaming west through the Spree forest. Busse's decision was tactically rational. It was the only sane choice available. But it was exactly what Marshals Zhukov and Konev had anticipated. Therefore, while Busse deliberated, the Soviets had been preparing something unprecedented. What the Germans didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the Soviet commanders had already won the battle before a single shot was fired. While Busse prepared his columns, Marshals Zhukov and Konev were executing a masterpiece of operational warfare. The systematic transformation of the forests around Halbe into a three-ring death trap. Konev redirected entire armies with surgical precision. General Vasily Chuikov's 8th Guards Army held the northern perimeter. General Pavel Rybalko's 3rd Guards Tank Army sealed the western approaches. The 28th Army and 13th Army completed the encirclement. But this wasn't reactive defense. This was pre-planned extermination. Soviet Stavka orders left no ambiguity. Complete destruction of all encircled forces. Every road had been surveyed. Every clearing had been measured. Every potential escape route had been designated as a pre-sighted target. Anti-tank guns, including captured German 7.5 centimeter POC 40s and 8.8 centimeter flak guns now turned against their former owners, were dug into camouflaged positions at calculated intervals. Minefields saturated the forest floor. Artillery crews had already plotted their firing solutions, waiting only for targets to enter their predetermined kill zones. The technical asymmetry was brutal. German forces possessed Panthers with their fearsome 75mm KWK-42 guns and 80mm frontal armor. But mechanical unreliability meant many broke down before reaching combat. Tiger Y and Tiger II tanks boasted 88mm guns and heavy armor, but they were fuel-starved behemoths in a logistical nightmare. Against them, waves of Soviet T-34/85s, each mounting an 85mm gun and sloped armor up to 90mm, capable of 34 to 55 km per hour, mechanically reliable, and backed by sustained logistics that German forces could only dream of. Therefore, even Germany's best tanks became useless metal boxes. Soviet tanks kept moving. Soviet guns kept firing. The Germans ran dry. Above the forest, Katyusha rocket launchers, BM-13 systems capable of firing 16 to 48 rockets in rapid succession, were positioned to blanket entire grid squares with high explosive. IL-2 Stormoviks circled overhead, waiting to strafe anything that moved. This wasn't a battle. This was an industrial killing operation, methodically prepared and ruthlessly efficient. On April 24th and 25th, as German columns entered the outer ring, tank commanders reported unusually quiet forests ahead. The silence wasn't peace. It was patience. The trap was set. Now it would spring shut. The forests around Halbe became a vision of hell on earth. Shredded pine trees stood like broken teeth, their trunks splintered by artillery. Burnt-out Panzer IVs and Panthers lay abandoned in the mud, their crews having run dry of fuel despite the tank's tactical superiority. The smell of cordite mixed with decomposing bodies. Wounded men screamed in makeshift aid stations with no morphine, no bandages, no hope. Everywhere, the claustrophobic density, soldiers, SS, Volkssturm militia, and thousands of terrified civilians pressed together in a shrinking pocket, fighting tree to tree through woods devastated by relentless bombardment. By late April, the German Ninth Army's logistics had collapsed entirely. War diaries reveal ammunition rationed to mere handfuls of rounds per gun. Fuel shortages immobilized entire Panzer battalions, Tigers, and Panthers. Mechanically superior but fatally thirsty, sat useless, and were blown up by their own crews to prevent capture. Food supplies were exhausted. Medical supplies critically low, leaving the wounded screaming in forest clearings or abandoned along the trails. Soldiers ate bark. They drank from shell craters. They watched their friends bleed out because there was nothing left to stop the bleeding. This wasn't an army anymore. It was thousands of desperate Kampfgruppen, mixed groups of Wehrmacht, SS, and civilians, with no coherent command, no supplies, no hope. But there was one obstacle that would become more infamous than any other. One final killing ground that every German soldier would have to cross if they wanted to live. The Berlin-Dresden Autobahn. The Berlin-Dresden Autobahn became the battle's most infamous killing ground. A wide concrete strip cutting through the forest like an open wound. Soviet tanks and anti-tank guns lined the opposite side, positioned with methodical precision in pre-sighted firing positions. German columns, armored vehicles, supply trucks, horse-drawn civilian carts, attempted suicidal dashes across that exposed concrete. Commanders knew what awaited them. They could see the Soviet guns. They could see the burned wrecks from previous attempts. But they had no choice. Behind them, Soviet forces were closing in. Ahead lay the only path to Wencke's 12th Army and potential survival. Therefore, they ran. One after another, vehicles exploded into flames mid-crossing. A Panther would lurch onto the concrete, engine roaring, only to erupt in fire as an 85mm shell punched through its side armor. Trucks loaded with wounded burst apart, scattering bodies across the pavement. Horse-drawn civilian carts, families clutching children and belongings, were caught in the open and systematically destroyed. The Autobahn became a literal highway of death, littered with hundreds of smoking wrecks and bodies. Soviet gunners didn't need to aim carefully. Anything that moved on that concrete strip was a target. Anything that stopped was dead. Civilians died alongside soldiers. Women clutching infants were cut down in the crossfire. Elderly refugees who couldn't run fast enough were left behind, their bodies adding to the growing piles. Children were separated from parents in the chaos. Some made it across alone. Others didn't make it at all. Between 5,000 and 10,000 civilians died during those 9 days. Many died on the Autobahn. Many more died in the forests, caught between Soviet artillery barrages and German defensive positions, or simply executed in the chaos. This was no longer a military operation. It was a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions. The Soviets maintained their operational efficiency throughout, while German forces disintegrated into chaos. Chuikov's 8th Guards Army and Rybalko's 3rd Guards Tank Army coordinated relentless attacks despite the challenges of rapid advance. Their superior logistics enabled continuous pressure, armor cutting escape routes, artillery crushing any concentration of resistance. Soviet commanders received constant intelligence updates. They adjusted firing solutions in real time. They repositioned armor to block new escape attempts. They maintained communication across multiple armies, ensuring no gap opened in the encirclement. This was textbook late-war Soviet operational art. Overwhelming firepower, sustained momentum, zero mercy. But the Germans kept fighting. Even a dying army with empty fuel tanks and nearly depleted ammunition could inflict terrible casualties when fighting for survival. Soviet forces paid heavily for their victory. 20,000 to 25,000 killed, and another 60,000 wounded. Every forest clearing became a killing ground for both sides. Every attempt to close the pocket cost Soviet lives. The difference was simple. The Soviets could replace their losses. The Germans couldn't. On May 1st and 2nd, Soviet forces launched their final assaults. The last desperate German groups, perhaps a few thousand survivors, attempted to break through in small, scattered clusters. Most were killed or captured within sight of Wenck's lines. By May 2nd, the Ninth Army had ceased to exist. The few who made it through looked like ghosts. Small groups of German soldiers, sometimes only a dozen men, staggered across the final stretch to Wenck's 12th Army lines between May 1st and 2nd. They emerged from forests that had become killing grounds, uniforms caked in mud and blood, eyes hollow from 9 days of continuous bombardment and hand-to-hand fighting. Many couldn't speak. Some couldn't stop shaking. All of them had watched their friends die. Behind them, the Ninth Army had effectively ceased to exist. The accounting was grim. At least 30,000 to 40,000 German soldiers lay dead in the forests around Halbe, bodies piled in the shattered tree lines, sprawled across the Autobahn, floating in the streams. Another 25,000 to 30,000 were captured by Soviet forces. Most wounded, all exhausted beyond the point of resistance. Between 5,000 and 10,000 refugees, women and children died in the crossfire, caught between Soviet artillery barrages and German defensive positions, crushed under tank treads on the Autobahn, or simply executed in the chaos. Soviet forces paid heavily for their victory. 20,000 to 25,000 killed and another 60,000 wounded. These staggering numbers reflected the ferocious desperation of German resistance. Even a dying army, with empty fuel tanks and nearly depleted ammunition, could inflict terrible casualties when fighting for survival. The cost revealed an uncomfortable truth about the Soviet kill box. Even a perfectly executed extermination operation demands a butcher's bill from both sides. Today, the Waldfriedhof Halbe, the Halbe Forest Cemetery, stands as permanent testament to those 9 days. It's one of Germany's largest war cemeteries, containing tens of thousands of remains recovered from the forests over decades. Row upon row of simple stone crosses stretch beneath peaceful pine trees. Many graves are marked simply "Unknown German Soldier." Some contain multiple bodies, buried together as they died. The forests are quiet now. Birds sing. Sunlight filters through the pines. Tourists walk the trails, unaware they're stepping over ground that once ran red. But the earth still gives up its dead. Even 75 years later, construction crews and hikers occasionally discover remains: a skull in the underbrush, a rusted helmet, bones scattered by decades of forest growth. Each discovery triggers a careful excavation, a forensic examination, and often a burial at Halbe with full military honors for a soldier whose name was lost in the chaos of those 9 days. The Battle of Halbe epitomized the Eastern Front's brutal endgame, not strategy or objectives, but annihilation and survival. General Busse's rational decision to break west was doomed before it began, crushed by Soviet operational brilliance and German logistical catastrophe. Marshals Zhukov and Konev had created something unprecedented: a multi-layered death trap where every German decision, which forest path to take, which clearing to cross, when to attempt the Autobahn, had already been anticipated and prepared for. The Ninth Army wasn't defeated in battle. It was processed through an industrial killing machine, systematically destroyed by overwhelming Soviet material superiority, sustained logistics, and ruthless operational coordination. The Ninth Army's path to freedom became their grave. Today, the Waldfriedhof Halbe stands as silent testament. Tens of thousands of graves beneath quiet forests. marking the spot where a dying regime's delusions met a desperate army's will to survive. All systematically destroyed in a perfectly engineered slaughterhouse. The 9 days of Halbe proved that by April 1945, German tactical courage was utterly irrelevant against the Red Army's vengeful efficiency. No amount of bravery could overcome empty fuel tanks. No tactical skill could defeat pre-sighted artillery. No desperation could break through 3 concentric rings of Soviet steel. And in April 1945, the Germans had run out of all 3. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.